There are things we are used to seeing as ordinary. A bathroom mirror, a bedroom window, footsteps on the street at night. We do not think about them until they begin to behave differently. The stories you are about to hear were not created by screenwriters. They were born from real events, recorded by police reports, witnesses, and archives. That is why they are more frightening than any movie, because they could have happened to anyone. And the most disturbing part, they happen exactly where we feel safe, at home, on familiar streets, in places we trust. Each of these stories is not just a legend, it is a warning. So, if you believe that your walls, your windows, and your roads protect you, prepare to hear something that will change how you see safety forever.
The house stood on a hill beyond an old road that led nowhere. It had been built before the war, and over the years it changed many owners, until one day it was abandoned forever. The windows were boarded up, the roof had sunk in, the yard was overgrown with weeds. People in the village said the house was cursed, that lights turned on there at night, that footsteps and voices could be heard inside. I always believed those stories were fiction. That is exactly why I decided to spend one night in that house. I arrived in the early evening. The sky was gray and the sun barely broke through the clouds. The wind moved the dry grass, and it felt as if something was shifting all around me. When I reached the house, the air became heavy, as if the place itself sensed my presence. The front door did not open at once. When it finally did, it creaked so loudly the sound echoed through the house. Inside, it smelled of dampness and dust. The floor was cracked, and dark stains covered the walls. I placed my backpack in the living room. An old armchair stood in the corner, as if someone had been sitting in it not long ago. The silence was strange. It did not calm me. It pressed down on me. When darkness fell, I went upstairs. The staircase groaned under every step. There were several doors in the hallway. One of them was slightly open. Inside the bedroom stood an empty bed and a broken mirror on the wall. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection. I turned sharply. Nothing. Closer to midnight, I heard footsteps. Slow, uneven. I turned off my flashlight. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds later, there was a knock. It came again and again, each time louder than before. The house grew cold, too cold. My breath turned to vapor. The doors I had left open were now closed. One of them began to open slowly on its own. An icy draft poured out of the room. I pointed the flashlight inside. The room was empty, but fresh footprints appeared on the floor. They led straight to the wall and ended there. Then I heard a whisper. It came from everywhere at once. I ran downstairs toward the exit, but the front door was gone. In its place was a wall. The house groaned. The flashlight began to flicker. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was blurred, as if made of shadow. That was when I understood. The house was alive, and it knew why I had come. The figure moved closer. I could no longer feel my legs. In the morning, the house looked empty again, just as it always had. But on the dusty floor, new footprints had appeared. They led to the center of the room and stopped. The house had accepted another guest. I looked closely and noticed a faint, barely visible handprint on the window. Fresh, warm. My heart tightened. The house had accepted another guest. And now I understood. It never lets go of its unwanted guests.
It happened in a small town in Ohio, at a local community gym. The place wasn't fancy. Fluorescent lights, squeaky floors, and the faint smell of chlorine drifting in from the pool. Mark, a 30-year-old teacher, had started coming there late in the evenings after work. By that time, the gym was nearly empty. He liked the quiet. But soon he began noticing small things. One night, he left his bag in the locker room. When he came back, the zipper was open. Nothing was missing, but he was sure he had closed it. Another evening, his sneakers were turned the opposite way. He thought maybe he had set them down wrong. Weeks passed, and the details grew stranger. A towel he never used was draped over his locker door. The clock above the shower showed a different time than his phone. He swore he heard the faint sound of someone breathing when he was alone. Mark mentioned it to the front desk clerk, who shrugged. "Probably kids messing around," she said. But he knew it wasn't kids. The gym was locked after hours. One night, after a long workout, he sat on the bench in the locker room, scrolling his phone. The room was silent, except for the hum of the vents. Then he noticed something. The row of lockers opposite him wasn't closed. One door was slightly ajar. He stared at it. The gap was dark, too dark. He stood, walked over, and pulled the door open. Inside was empty, just metal walls and a faint smell of sweat. But when he turned back, his own locker door was wide open. Mark froze. He hadn't touched it. His bag was inside, but the zipper was undone again. He left quickly that night, telling himself he was tired, imagining things. The next week, he tried to ignore it. He showered, dressed, and kept his eyes down. But as he was leaving, he glanced back at the locker room. Every single locker door was open. He hasn't returned to that gym since. And sometimes, when he drives past the building at night, he swears he sees the faint glow of the locker room lights and the doors, all standing open, waiting.
He lived alone. An ordinary apartment in an old building where everything had long become familiar. The smell of fresh paint in the stairwell, the creak of the steps, the hum of neighbors' televisions through the walls. Every evening he returned home by the same route, took off his shoes, placed them neatly beside the door, and turned on the light in the hallway. Everything was the same, day after day. But one day, he noticed that the shoes were standing slightly differently than he had left them. The toes were turned toward the room. He told himself that perhaps he had put them that way without noticing. The next day, the smell in the apartment changed. Light, but chujoi, foreign. Not sharp, not unpleasant, just strange, as if someone had recently been there and left. He opened the windows and aired the place out, but by evening, the smell returned. A few days later, he noticed that the cup on the table was not where he had left it. At first, it was a few centimeters closer to the edge. Then one day, it was on the other end of the table. He tried to explain it logically. Maybe he had moved it himself, maybe vibrations from passing cars. But inside, the feeling grew that someone was touching his things. At night, he woke up with a strange sensation. No sound, no movement, just the feeling that someone else was in the room. He lay still, listening. The silence was too dense. He got up and walked through the apartment. Everything seemed to be in place, but when he returned to the bedroom, he noticed the door slightly ajar, although he was certain he had closed it. From then on, he became more attentive. Every day he checked the position of objects, compared them, memorized them, and still found discrepancies. A book on the shelf turned the other way, a spoon lying differently in the drying rack, the curtains slightly parted. The sense of presence intensified. Sometimes he felt that he was being watched, especially in the evenings when he sat by the window. He caught himself unable to eat or read calmly. It was as if a gaze slid along his shoulder. One night he woke again, this time because of the smell, stronger than before, as if someone had just passed through the room. He lay without moving and heard breathing. Quiet, even, right beside him. He abruptly turned on the light. The room was empty. In the morning, he noticed that the front door was open wide, although he clearly remembered locking it. The lock was intact, but the door stood open. He began sleeping with the light on, but it did not help. The feeling did not disappear. Sometimes he woke to find objects shifted again. Sometimes the curtains slightly parted. The sense of presence became constant. He stopped feeling like the owner of his own apartment. Every movement became cautious. Every morning began with checking what had changed during the night. The ending came quietly. One day he came home and saw that everything was perfect. Not a single object out of place, no smell, no oddities. And that was what frightened him most, because he understood whoever was here before had not left. He was simply waiting.
An ordinary life, an ordinary apartment on the edge of the city, an ordinary stairwell where neighbors rarely greet one another. Every morning he went out for coffee at the kiosk across the street. He came back, set the cup on the table, opened his laptop. The routine was calibrated down to the smallest details. After a couple of weeks, he noticed something strange. The laptop lid was sometimes slightly open, although he clearly remembered closing it before going to bed. He decided he simply hadn't paid attention. Then small things began to shift. The mouse was not where it should be. The mug ended up closer to the edge of the desk. The bedroom curtains were parted by a few centimeters. Nothing frightening, more irritating than alarming. He started checking the door before going to sleep. Once, then twice. Sometimes he even took a photo of the lock on his phone, just to make sure in the morning that he hadn't forgotten. One evening, he discovered that the trash bin was empty, although he clearly remembered not taking the garbage out. The bag was gone. He stood in the kitchen, trying to reconstruct the day, but his memory offered nothing. The next day, he noticed a smell, barely perceptible, foreign, not sharp, not unpleasant, but distinctly not his. He opened the windows and blamed it on ventilation and neighbors. That night, he woke up for no reason. The apartment was quiet, but something about the silence felt wrong, as if the air had already been used. In the morning, on the floor in the hallway, he saw a trace, not a footprint, more like a dent in the dust, as if from a socked foot. He did not call the police. He did not tell his friends. He needed an explanation, not questions. A few days later, he installed a camera near the front door and reviewed the recordings every morning, until one day he noticed a gap. The recording was missing from 3:02 to 3:47, not damaged, not deleted. It simply did not exist. That same night, he woke again, and this time he understood. Someone was in the apartment. No sound, no footsteps, just presence. In the morning, the camera was working perfectly again. The door was locked, the windows were closed. On the kitchen table lay his phone, completely drained, screen facing up. He stood there, looking at it for several minutes before understanding the main thing. Whoever had been here knew how not to leave traces and had no intention of leaving.
I always believed our home was safe. A quiet street, well-kept lawns, identical mailboxes, all of it created an illusion of calm. In the evenings, I liked to sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching neighbors walk their dogs and children play hide and seek. It felt as though nothing could disturb this idyll. But one day, I noticed that someone was watching me. At first, it was just fleeting glances. I stepped out one evening to close the shutters, and in the window across the street stood my neighbor. He seemed to pause by chance, but for too long for it to be coincidence. His eyes did not turn away. I froze, then waved it off. Probably nothing, just a coincidence. But when I looked again, he was still there. I closed the curtains and tried to forget. From that day on, his presence became part of my life. The neighbor lived alone. His house was the same as all the others, a white facade, a green lawn, a neat fence. But unlike the rest, his windows were almost always closed. And yet, I noticed his silhouette. I would be cooking dinner and suddenly feel that someone was watching me. I would approach the window and see him. But as soon as I got closer, he disappeared, as if dissolving into the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, but the feeling would not let go. It clung to me like sticky webbing. One night, I woke with a strange sensation. The room was quiet, but I heard breathing. It did not belong to me or my husband. It was coming from outside at the window. I stepped closer, and a shadow flickered across the glass. I screamed, but the street was empty. After that, the breathing kept returning. It was steady, insistent, as if someone were standing very close, just beyond the glass, waiting. I was afraid to open the curtains because I knew he was there. And the most frightening thing was not that he was watching, it was what he was planning. Every evening, I caught myself thinking, if I move too close, he will disappear, but the breathing will remain. It will wait until I open the window myself. The neighbor began appearing more often. Sometimes he stood completely still, sometimes he took a few steps, but he always vanished the moment I tried to catch his gaze. Then I began noticing other things. My phone displayed a notification, "We see you," even though there was no signal. Smudges appeared on the glass as if someone had touched it from the inside. Near the window, I found shoe prints that belonged to neither me nor my husband. I tried to talk to my husband, but he only laughed. "You watch too many thrillers." But I knew it wasn't imagination. One night, the breathing grew louder. It was so clear I could no longer ignore it. I stepped closer to the window and heard it right against the glass. I was shaking, but I decided to act. I tore the curtains open and saw him. The neighbor stood directly in front of the window, in the darkness, staring. His face was motionless, his eyes empty. He did not move, but the breathing continued. I screamed, and he vanished. The next day, I decided to confront him. I went to his house, but it was empty. The neighbor says he had moved away long ago, but I knew that was a lie. That night, the breathing returned. It was inside. I heard it directly behind me. I turned and saw a reflection in the window. It was me, and beside me, him. Now I live in a house where the breathing never stops. It has become part of my life. I know he was waiting, and now he is here.